Hi there. It is, already Wednesday, and this is vlog 11 or 12, and this is going to be a very, very long video. I have never before spoken in public or spoken in any sort of a forum like a video or anything like that about an experience that happened to me many years ago while I was living in a monastery in a Catholic Benedictine monastery in central Minnesota, and I have been meaning for many years to put together a video about this experience and detail exactly what transpired with me while I was living in this monastery, and while and how the experience occurred, and the reason why I ended up in the monastery, and then go into very great detail about the actual spiritual experience itself. For many years after that experience, I didn't tell anybody about it because it wasn't that I was afraid of being judged or that I was afraid that people would look at me differently if I talked about this. This experience was so profoundly personal for me, and so precious and so beautiful that I didn't feel the need to share it with anybody. I felt as though this was something that was between myself and God, and that I was not prepared to share it. I wasn't worried about whether anybody would think I was a nutcase or whether they believed me or not. I quite honestly could care less if people believed me or not. I think there are a lot of people who may watch this who may think that I'm getting one over trying to pull somebody's leg on this, but I have no reason to. I have no reason to discuss this experience other than I want to make sure that I put this out on video because it's a powerful experience, and it changed the course of my life, and it continues to change the course of my life. And my spirituality is a very personal thing for me. I'm not a person who goes around proselytizing or talking to other people about God. I respect all faiths. I respect anybody who is trying to love their neighbor as themselves. And that's what my faith tells me to do today. I don't belong to any organized religion or any organized church, although I would like to get more involved in helping other people, and that was one of the goals of my retirement, was to be more of service to people and utilize my gifts of photography and writing and doing videos to be able to help other people, and also to bring us all closer together. Some people, if you're not interested in spiritual experiences, or you don't have any familiarity with it, and you're not interested, just click out of this. No need to go into it. I'm not looking for any kudos or anything else with this video. I just want to make sure that I've cataloged it properly, and that I've documented it properly, and that I put it out there into the world. And maybe there are some people who are in despair right now, or who have had a hard life, and maybe they are struggling with self-esteem and self-loathing or self-hatred, that they may get some comfort, some solace from my story and what transpired with me. I hope that's the case, but I did want to share this with other people. I'm not looking for a viral video or to blow the roof off of YouTube with this experience. I'm sure if you look around, there are many, many, many near-death experiences on YouTube. As a matter of fact, I became a near-death video YouTube junkie many years ago, and that's part of my story here. And I still love to hear people's experiences that are spiritually transformative, or that they had a near-death experience and they're telling their story, or they had a profound spiritual experience that happened to them and they're telling their story. I'm still fascinated by that, and I still get a lot of comfort in that, because it helps me remember that I do have a community. There is a community of people out there who have also had very similar experiences, and and I'm so grateful that those people have been out there, and they have told their story to the general public. They've let themselves open and shared their experiences with people, and I'm so grateful for them for that. And I'm hoping that this can just be another story about an encounter with a higher power that was greater than myself and that loved me unconditionally. So without further ado, I'm going to connect this to the main video. It's a long one, be advised, but hopefully you find it worthwhile. And if not, then click out of it and wait for another video from me. I'm doing a lot of stuff. I'm in photography, and I've got things planned to talk about some of the projects that I'm going to be involved with my photography and writing. And so if this isn't your cup of tea, no problem. You can always just turn it off. So anyways, without further ado, here's my story. I wanted to talk about something unrelated to my photography and unrelated to, although everything is kind of related together, I think, as far as my art and who I am and my photography and writing and whatever. But I'm going to start from the beginning, and it's going to be a while till I get to where I need to go, so bear with me. But grew up in a family on the east side of Milwaukee, Irish Catholic family, 6 kids. My father was a functioning alcoholic who had a good job. He was a professional guy with as an attorney, and worked for a good company. But he was also a binge drinker and a severe alcoholic. And he was very verbally abusive and physically abusive to me. And I remember him being physically abusive to one of my sisters. I don't know if he was physically abusive with anybody else, but he was to me, and he was to my sister, who was 1 year older than I was. But I remember those things. So anyways, how did that affect me? I don't know. I've always suffered from a very low sense of self-esteem. I had to navigate a world where I didn't feel safe at home with my father, and it was just a really terrible environment, because there would be weeks, sometimes even a month would go by, and he would not drink at all, and he would be in a fairly good mood, and he could be affectionate and funny and easy to be around. And then he would disappear, and he would binge drink, and then you never knew what you were dealing with. And it was a cyclical pattern that happened throughout the course of my life, where he would disappear and then be drinking for 3, 4, 5 days in a row. And then he would be going through a period where he was drying out, and that was even worse than the drinking period, because he was home, but he was really, really angry and miserable guy, and we had to walk around on eggshells all the time. So for me, being a highly sensitive person, it was really a brutal experience, and it really affected my self-esteem. And because of that, I just I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't focus on anything. I was always worried about him, his drinking, about us losing the house, him losing his job because of his drinking. Just felt very, very alone. I could never sleep until he got home, and he would sometimes not get home till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. and then I don't have to get up and go to school. And it was really a bad situation. And my mom couldn't get a handle on it. She had 6 kids, and she was trying to keep the family together. And my father was just like another big, crazy, out of control kid who controlled everything. So it was not a great situation. But what I want to talk about is what kind of happened with me is that I was going to school at a parochial school that was literally 5 blocks away. I could walk straight down the street, my street, to school, to parochial school, from 1st grade to 8th grade. And during that time, I was bullied by a group of kids who lived in the neighborhood a block over from me, and they were really, really brutal. And that brutality, they would steal my hat, they'd beat me up, happened almost every day on my way to school. It got to the point where I couldn't walk straight down the street to school, even with my sisters and my family. I would have to, I'd have to find a way to get through other people's backyards and go a couple blocks over to get to school or whatever. And then I was bullied at school and bullied, I was bullied by kids on the playground during recess and breaks and after school, and it was really brutal, and it happened on an almost daily basis for me. And then there was nobody that I could talk to at home about how I was feeling or how I was thinking or what was going on with me. And I couldn't function at school. Although I was a very bright kid and I always had really great test scores, I couldn't even crack a book. I couldn't do anything other than the reading that I did for myself personally because I love to read. And I did a lot of reading, but I couldn't focus on anything at school. I was so out of sorts and so preoccupied with what was happening at home and the bullying and all that stuff. I just shut down, and I don't think I ever got a grade higher than a C all the way through parochial school. And it was full of nuns, and the nuns were brutal, and I really felt on the outside, and I didn't really have any friends. I had a couple friends as I got older, but they didn't live near me. And, my sisters were older, and I don't know what they were going through. We never talked to each other about what was going on. We never had a chance to talk together as a group. We all just kind of went through it alone. We didn't really have any way to talk to each other about it. And then I had all this bullying that was going on. It was really brutal. And so I was brutalized at home. I didn't feel safe at home, and I would go and hide in the basement, or there was a chair in the living room that I would rock on, and I would just rock for hours at a time down in the basement with the lights shut off, or upstairs in the living room. That's where I started, and then we moved the chair downstairs, and I was out of everybody's way, and I would go and I would rock. And I rocked all the way through, I believe, 8th grade, for hours a day. And somehow that soothed me. That was a self-soothing mechanism that kept me sane. But I would withdraw into myself and create a world inside of myself which kept me safe. And it was a world where my father wasn't an alcoholic, and my mom didn't have migraines and stay in a room for days, and everybody was healthy and happy, and it was a different kind of world than what I was growing up in. And that's how I survived. I survived by building an internal place for myself where I could survive that. And then when I got to school, the nuns would pick on me because I had no homework done. My desk, which had one of those flip tops where you keep all of your personal possessions on the inside, all your notebooks and markers and all that, and pens, pencils, all that stuff. And kids would constantly tease me, and I would be constantly the butt of jokes all the time. And then I was in second grade, and my desk was a mess, and I remember the nun grabbing me by the neck and pushing me into the middle of the room, and then grabbing my desk and lifting it up and bringing it out in the middle of the room, and then dumping all my possessions out on the floor, and all the kids laughing because it was such a mess. And I remember I just sat there, and I couldn't respond. I felt so humiliated. I felt so like such a loser, really. I mean, I really felt lower than low, like I was not, like I was a complete failure. And that stuck with me, and that feeling has stuck with me through most of my adult life. But I did get through it, and I got through it with trauma therapy. And it wasn't until my early 60s, I'm 65 now, until my 63, I think, is when I began to read up and began to do therapy in chronic traumatic stress disorder, which is what I had suffered from. In any case, also what was going on with me was that periodically I would have these transient experiences of a presence greater than me. Of course, I was going to a Catholic school. I was being taught all about the love of Jesus and blah, 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 blah. And none of that was being demonstrated to me. It wasn't as if there was any shining examples of love and charity that I knew. All I knew was really I wasn't safe at school. I wasn't safe at home. I wasn't safe on the way to school. And the only things that made me feel good was playing sports, which I became good at, playing baseball and football and basketball. Primarily football, though, is what was the best for me, because when I got on a football field and I put a helmet on, I could hurt other people. And that's what I wanted to do. So in any case, so that went on for years until like going into 7th grade, at which point I went from a really fat kid. I wasn't a really fat kid. I was just a chunky, heavy kid to I grew 6 inches and put on about 20 pounds and became a really good football player. And then at school, I finally got so angry with these kids that it was payback time for me. I wasn't frightened of them anymore. I was going to kill each and every one of them. That's what my thinking was. And but I maintained myself through 7th grade, and then in 8th grade, they kept teasing me. I remember coming home. Our whole grade had gone to a play down in Chicago. I think it was Pippin is what was being played down there, and then which was really a really cool musical. And we were coming back, and there were 2 kids sitting right behind me, Tom Popoliski, and then I think the other one was Smith. I forget his first name. Peter Smith. That's what it was. And they were both really punks and really, really were behind me, calling me names, monkey face, and just going at me, trying to get my goat. And I was sitting right next to me was Teresa Maniaci. She kind of reached out and she held my hand. She said, "Don't let him get to you, John. Don't let him get to you." But we stepped off the bus when we stepped off the bus when we pulled up to the school, and I walked over to Tom Popoliski and I punched him right in the face as hard as I could and bloodied his lip and his face and everything like that. And then it was go time for me. I was going to find every one of them and beat the shit out of them. And so, I wasn't the one who was running at that point. Then everybody else was running from me. And I think I I think I ended up going after most of them. I remember there was Peter Foreign who was teased me, and I almost broke his nose. I don't know what happened, but his nose exploded when I punched him. And then there were another couple of kids I threw in the bike racks. And by that time, I was no longer intimidated by anybody, and I was angry as hell. And that anger never really left me. But I still had that feeling of being worthless. And but I guess what I'm getting to is that during this time, during all of this time, I would have every now and then this really comforting feeling of a presence greater than myself around me. It would happen, it was very transient. It would only happen every once in a great while, and I didn't know what to make of it. And it started to happen to me more towards the end of high school. And at that point, I was smoking pot a lot, and I was hanging out with kids that were doing a lot of drugs, and that's just the way it was. This was, 76 and 77, and I didn't really think too much about it, and I didn't associate it with the drugs because I knew that this was something that didn't have anything to do with that. But then when I went to college my freshman year at Eau Claire, I was walking outside the dorm one night, and I was coming back from the lower campus. I came up the hill, and I was walking towards the dorm, and then all of a sudden, I remember praying. I remember asking God to make me into a decent person, because I really, really felt terrible about myself. I just, I lied about everything. I couldn't be straight with people. I couldn't tell them who I really was. I felt if they knew who I really was, that they would hate me, that they would abandon me, that they would not understand. And so I really blurred the lines between that inner world that I had created for myself, where I was this really successful, smart guy that had all these things that had happened, had done a whole lot, and between who I was, which was a kid who was pretty frightened and had very low self-esteem and really didn't like himself very much. In fact, I had a very poor sense of self-esteem chronically. And I remember being outside the dorm and just saying like a quick prayer, and I don't even know where it came out of. I don't know if I was sad or whatever, or I was ashamed of myself because I had lied to somebody about something which I was doing all the time. And then all of a sudden I felt this tremendous presence of, of this loving, it was a loving presence. It wasn't even a being. It was just this very loving presence. And I felt surrounded by it. And I remember standing in the dark crying because I felt this incredible sense of peace and love. And and at this point in my life, I had given up Catholicism. I hated Catholicism. I hated everything that it taught. I had no faith in any of it. I didn't believe any of it. I didn't believe anything. I had started to read like Marx and Freud and Jung, and I just pretty much discounted any idea of a God. And I had no sense of that. When I made that prayer, I just kind of came out of me, and I felt this. I had this experience. And then my sophomore year in college, I began to know like a group of guys, and we had started spontaneously to have these long philosophical conversations. And we spontaneously, I don't know how it happened, but we began to read the New Testament together. And it was during that time that I was having these profound spiritual experiences more frequently. And then one morning, we had stayed up throughout the night, and we weren't doing drugs or anything like that. We were just reading the New Testament, and there were maybe 3 or 4 guys in this dorm room, and it was early spring of my sophomore year in college. And all of a sudden, the room, we were praying. I don't know if we were praying or we were just talking about the gospel, but all of a sudden there was this sense of the Holy Spirit filling the room. I don't even know how to talk about it. I'm not sure what happened, but all of a sudden there was this profound sense of the Holy Spirit filling this room, and it was a feeling of love and just filling our hearts with gratitude. We were all experiencing it at the same time. It happened spontaneously. Nobody said anything. It just like filled the room. And I just remember everybody like getting really emotional and feeling this tremendous sense of love and this presence of God. And it was incredible. And I don't know if we ever even talked about it after that. I don't know if I ever talked to... A friend of mine, George, was a guy that had gone to high school with me, and I didn't really know him. I didn't know him in high school. He hung out with a different group of people than I did. But I got to know him up at... he had gone up to UW Eau Claire with me, and I got to know him then. And we had ended up transferring up to the Twin Cities then between our sophomore and our junior year, and we had lived together for a while. And he had kind of backed away from the whole Christian thing, and I was exploring a lot of different things. I'd explored Taoism and Buddhism and all of this stuff. And there was another guy that was a really good friend of mine named Steve, and he went through the same experiences that I did, and he ended up also transferring up to Minnesota at some point. I know he had left Eau Claire. I don't know if he finished his sophomore year at Eau Claire or not. I don't remember. But I do remember him coming up and eventually living with me for a couple of years in Minneapolis. And he was my roommate for quite a long time. And I do remember that he was in the room that morning and that he had also had a profound spiritual experience. So he and I had explored. By the time we got to Minnesota, we were looking for like churches and things like that, and there were a lot of like fundamentalist churches. I mean, they were really by fundamentalists they were literalists. They believed they took the Bible literally. And we began to listen on the radio to Chuck Smith, who was broadcasting out of California, and he was talking about the end times, and we really got into that a lot. And ended up going on a weekend with, I don't know if Steve went with me or not, but I ended up going on a weekend with this Bible church to some sort of a camp somewhere. And I was also with another friend of mine, Ellen, who was also had grown up Methodist, but was also seeking too. And she and I had become friends, and we had spent the weekend there, and I didn't feel right about the entire thing. Something about it was off. I didn't feel like a literal interpretation of the Bible was the correct thing. The whole thing felt off to me. And I remember when I got back from that weekend that I dropped out completely out of any kind of church. But was beginning to pray, beginning to really really beginning to understand that there was a God, and that and Jesus was a reality, and that in some way I could communicate with God. I could pray, but I didn't. Those spiritual experiences would happen, and they would be very transient, and sometimes not even related to prayer, and then it would disappear. And I ended up living with a woman who was much older than I was. I was looking for a place to live, and Steve and I had been living together, but we moved out on our own. I don't remember what. Oh, he ended up getting an apartment at a church near Dinkytown, which is right outside of the campus, and he was working there at the church and living there, and I ended up moving in with this woman and her two small kids, and I ended up. I mean, it took a long time, but I ended up having an affair with well, not an affair with this woman, just a relationship with this woman, and we ended up having sex a few times and kind of having this relationship. It was really weird. It was really screwed up. I mean, she was probably 10 years older than I was. She was in veterinarian school, and she had already gotten her, I believe she already had a master's or a doctorate already, and she was going into veterinarian school at the University of Minnesota, and I took care of I would spend time with the kids, babysitting them while she was gone, and then we ended up, I don't know, just getting together, and then it was really a disaster for me because I had no idea who I was. I was really screwed up. I really had no sense of who I was as a person or what I wanted to do or who I was. And we'd had sex one night, and then I don't know, a couple months later, we were living together but not having a relationship. And she came in one night and told me that she had an abortion, that she had to have an abortion because we had had sex and I'd gotten her pregnant, and it was twins. And I couldn't talk to anybody about it. I couldn't share that with anybody, and I've never told anybody about that, but it was heartbreaking. It was really, really heartbreaking. And I remember just like feeling like worse than zero. I just felt like there was really no reason to keep going. And somehow I wandered into this. I was coming back from class and I was feeling terrible, and I wandered into this church at noon, and a priest, he was a Paulist priest, which is a religious order, and they had a church right in Dinkytown, and I sat down and he started saying the Eucharistic prayer, at which point I had this super profound experience where I felt God was talking directly to me as he was saying the Eucharistic prayer, which is a powerful sacrament and a powerful prayer for forgiveness and for being human and and the forgiveness of God and all of those things. And I just felt like it was directly speaking to me, like he was speaking to me, that God was speaking to me through him. And it was a very profound experience. I ended up spending time with him. I would go and see him like once a week, usually at night, and we would talk. And I talked to him. I didn't tell him anything about what was going on with me. I didn't tell him about the abortion or other things, but I did tell him that the Eucharistic prayer changed me, and I began to believe in Catholicism again. And subsequently, I was a philosophy major at the University of Minnesota and taking a lot of creative writing classes as well. And I began to start to read. I took a class in medieval theology or medieval philosophy or whatever it was, and it was Descartes, cogito ergo sum, which was his bedrock of his belief in God. And I began to read St. Thomas Aquinas, which I eventually did my undergraduate paper in on from the Summa Theologica for the 4 cosmological proofs for the existence of God. So I was really, really getting into it, and he said, I think I'd like to take you up to St. John's, and why don't you spend a weekend there, and we'll do a retreat. And I did, and I spent the weekend there, and there was something about the silence, the way that the monks prayed, and the depth of it and the silence of it, of their liturgy, and then the Gregorian chant with the Psalms and the Proverbs and going back and forth, and it was very solemn, and it was very, very quiet, and the monastic life was about the internal life. And I became really intrigued with that theology. When I was there, I remember being at that service and feeling that presence again, that spiritual presence, although it was not super profound. I remember feeling it. And then I began to read, a lot of Thomas Merton's Seeds of Contemplation and Seven Story Mountain, about Merton's conversion eventually and becoming a Trappist monk. And then I went to a Trappist monastery outside Des Moines, New Mallory, and that didn't seem like a good fit for me. And I ended up going back up to St. John's, and something about it just really, really appealed to me. And I just began to read more and more about it. And I left Minnesota and ended up back down in Milwaukee, doing odd jobs, cleaning pools, doing a couple of different things, just barely scraping by. And I decided that I wanted to give that monastery a try, and that they had a postulancy period of 3 months. So I applied for it, and I got accepted. So I went up there for 3 months. And during those 3 months, you live in the monastery, and you go through a battery of psychological testing and everything like that. But I felt really safe in the monastery, and I felt really kind of protected, and I felt a really strong presence of God there. And I had a couple of profound spiritual experiences where I really strongly felt the presence of God, and I felt love for me, which was the first time I had ever really felt it. It's not the kind of thing that feels like human love. It's just so much more encompassing and profound and personal. So I got into the postulancy period, and then they invited me to do the novitiate, which is a year-long program where you live in the monastery with the monks, and you're in the cloister, and you do a bunch of odd jobs, and you're learning about becoming a monk and the history of monasticism and everything like that, and living among the monks. And I did that. And that whole year I did it, and I was beginning to feel more and more. I was doing a lot of writing and a lot of thinking and a lot of praying, and but I still felt all this inner turmoil, all this incredible inner turmoil. And now it was really coming out, because we would practice, we would go to our cells at night, just these little rooms that we had in the oldest part of the monastery, the quadrangle. And we had our own rooms, and we would, have the nights to ourselves, and I would read, and I would do a lot of writing and everything like that. And I got through the novitiate, and then it was time for the juniorate, and I started that. And then I became really, really despondent. I became really, really disillusioned with what was going on at St. John's, because I was no longer naive about what was happening in religious life. It became pretty apparent to me that the people who were happiest living that life were people who were not struggling with heterosexuality like I was. I mean, that's probably the nicest way to put it. But I would say, conservatively, at least 85 to 90% of the men that were living in the monastery were of homosexual orientation. It doesn't mean that they were living as gay men or that they were having sex, although there were quite a few guys that were that were in their 30s and everything, and I think they were going down to Minneapolis on a regular basis, and they were having sex and doing things, and I would hear a little bit about it here and there, but it was pretty much of a well-kept secret at that point, and nobody talked about it or anything like that. And then one night I was down, there was a gym in the bottom of the monastery, and they also had a sweat, like a sauna. And I was in the sauna, and there was a priest that came in, and he made a pass at me. It wasn't, it was pretty straightforward. And I went and I told Father Tim about it, who was in charge of us. And he must report it to the abbot, because within 2 days this priest was gone. I understand that they had sent him to live in a hermitage in Japan, or some sort of a small little monastery that they had outside of Tokyo in Japan. So he disappeared. But I became increasingly despondent. I became increasingly filled with like a feeling like I have no idea what I'm doing here. I can't see myself being happy in this life. The only people who are happy here are men who don't have the same heterosexual conflicts that I did. I couldn't talk to anybody about what was really going on with me. And it really, really got bad, to the point where one night I began to contemplate killing myself. And it got to the point where I'd gotten 2 razor blades, and I was going to go down to the end of the lake. The lake was Lake Sagatagan, I think is what it was called. And I was going to go down to the end of the lake, and I was going to cut my wrists and just walk in the water and bleed out. Because nothing made sense anymore, and I was miserable. I was really, really, really miserable. And so the night before I was planning on doing it, I was in my room, my cell, at about 10:30 or 10:45 at night. And then I said a prayer, and my prayer was, and it had been months since it had been a long time, almost a year since I had any sense of spirituality, any sense that there was the presence of God or Jesus or anything like that. All that was gone, and I was just full of despair, and I was full of remorse, and just hated myself, and just wanted to put an end to the pain and the loneliness and the fear and all of that. And so I prayed, and I said, God, if you're real, I need to know now. If you're really here, I need to feel your presence. I need to know. You have to let me know. Because if you don't, then there's no reason to go on. There's no reason to live this life if you're not real. If this is all just a figment of my imagination, and I'm just a mental case who is broken and will never be fixed. And if that's the case, if you don't respond, then at least I know. And I did it with resignation. I wasn't mad at God or upset or anything like that. I just was resigned. I hadn't felt that spiritual experience for a long time. Nothing had happened, and I just was resigned. And I said that prayer. And then my spiritual experience happened. And this is what transpired. And I have finally shared my experience with people. This is the first time I'm going public with it. This is the first time that I'm recording it and actually going to be putting it out there. But I have told a couple people through the years, and finally this last year, I don't know if it was over Thanksgiving or Christmas, but I was with my 2 sisters, Julie and Kitty, and then my mom, and I told them about my experience. I broke down, and I sobbed and wept, which is exactly what transpired during this experience. So let me get into it. Other than that, I haven't told hardly anybody, because it was my experience, and for me, it changed the course of my life. So, in any case, what transpired was I was in this cell, by myself, and it was these tall rooms, and you had walls and everything like that, and there were very spare rooms. You had a desk and a set of drawers and a bed, and that was it. You didn't have anything else. And I was sitting in my bed, and then all of a sudden, my eyes were closed, and I felt a wind in the room. And this is like middle February or March. I felt a wind in the room, and it was really a strong wind. And then all of a sudden, the brightest light flooded the room, and it flooded the room. It didn't hurt my eyes, but it was very, very bright. Then all of a sudden, I felt like I was being held in the arms of Christ, and waves and waves of love and understanding and acceptance just poured over me. It was like I was being dipped into a lake of pure love and acceptance and understanding, and this experience that there was a presence in the room that was a male presence. It felt to me like a father, like I would have imagined a father who was super loving and super together and super, like the greatest father that ever existed was in this room, and he was off on my left-hand side, and I couldn't see Christ. I could feel these arms around me holding me like a baby, and I felt over my left shoulder this voice that was talking to me, and I didn't hear a voice right away. All I did was I felt this love, this incredible love, incredible sense of compassion. The light was all around me, and I felt like I was dipped in the sea of love, and that this presence knew me completely, knew everything about me, knew every cell of my being. And then he called me by my real name, not the name my parents gave me, not the name that I was known by or anything like that. There was another name that was given to me before the worlds were formed. I don't know how I knew this, but all of a sudden it was just like I was called by that name, and I knew it was God the Father. I knew that's who was in the room with me, and his presence was unbelievable. And it wasn't like the Tao, or it was an entity. It was an entity, and it wasn't just an entity. It was superhuman. That's how God was, a superhuman Father to me, and the love was just incredible when he called me by my name. And I just sobbed, and I cried, and I cried, and I cried. And I just felt wave after wave of love crashing over me, and just felt completely safe and loved in a way that I had never experienced. And I don't know, I know the whole thing sounds crazy, but it was happening. It was really, really happening. And it was such a profound experience. I can put myself right back there in a minute, and I can feel it. And it, I'm a 65-year-old guy. I've had 2 children. I've got 4 grandchildren. I remember all of their births. I remember all the times I was in the hospital with my ex-wife having kids and all of that. And I remember those things, and those are memories to me. Those are memories. They're strong memories. They're powerful memories. But they're just memories. I don't remember all the details, but I remember everything. This was not a memory of this experience. This experience was so ultra real that it was more real than reality. I don't even know how to express it other than to say, when I was in that room and I was in God's presence, when I was in Father's presence and he was loving me and understood me completely. And my sin, he didn't condemn me, he didn't hate me, he didn't judge me, he just poured love into me, and I felt these arms around me, and it was so profoundly powerful. It was just so profoundly powerful. And I said, where have you been? Why has life been so painful for me? Why have I done such a terrible job? What is wrong with me? Why haven't you stepped in? I was just so like an open, raw pain. And I said, where have you been? Where have you been? And all of a sudden, it was almost like Dickens' Christmas Carol, where I was visited by three spirits, only it was God the Father. And all of a sudden, I remembered something that I'd completely forgotten, that my father had gotten drunk one night. It was a couple nights before Christmas Eve, and he had come home from like a Christmas party or something, and he was really like, that night, I don't know what I did or what I said, but he grabbed me by the back of the neck, and I was just in my t-shirt and my pajama bottoms, and he pushed me out the door. He shut the door. And I was afraid the neighbors were going to see me. So I ran around to the side of the house. I got in between the bushes, and I could hear my mom yelling at my father to open the door and to let me back in. I was going to freeze out there because it was below freezing. And he was really drunk, and he was yelling and screaming and everything like that. And I was sitting there, and I was watching this, and I just felt so much compassion and love for myself as a child. I just watched myself, and I said, God, how could you have allowed that to happen to me? I mean, where were you? And he said, look closely. And then I looked again, and there was this light, this blue light around my body. And it was then that he said to me, and he called me by my real name. I don't remember the name. He called me by my real name, and when I came out of this experience, I couldn't remember the name. I just feel like if somebody said it now, I would know it, but I can't remember it. And he said my real name, he goes, no harm will ever come to you. No harm will ever come to you. And there's nothing that you can do that will separate you from my love. And I just wept. I wept for that child, and I wept for myself. And then finally the door opened, and I ran back in the house. I don't know if it was more than a minute or 2 minutes or whatever it was. Probably wasn't that long. And then I remember running downstairs in the basement and hiding. And then it was like one experience after another, like me getting beaten up on the way to school, and me being, all of a sudden I was back in the classroom there, and the nun was dumping my stuff on the floor in front of all these kids who were laughing and pointing at me, and I was this runny-nosed, chubby kid, and who was just a goofy kid. And I felt such compassion for myself, and I was crying. But I could see a light around my body, and I could see that God was with me the entire time. And then all of a sudden, with this experience, all of a sudden, I was shot out into the universe. I don't know how to explain what transpired next, but God was right with me, and I was still being held in this sea of love and these arms, and then all of a sudden I was shot into space, and I could see the earth. And then all of a sudden I was in this place. It was like orange. It was like orangish light. All of a sudden the whole room was orange light, and it's really warm. It felt like a womb. It's the best way I can describe it. It felt like a womb. And all of a sudden I understood, and it just felt like home, and I understood that I had been there before. I had been there before, and when he called me by my name, I knew where I was. I was in the place that souls come and go, and where we choose to be incarnated again and again, because we are given this incarnate life. We're given this life in order to increase our capacity to love and be loved. On a journey, on our soul's journey to grow into love. That we were on this, in this process of just constantly increasing our capacity to love and be loved. And every soul was in this thing, and I felt souls coming and going, and I didn't know how to describe it, but I knew that I had chosen my life, that there were things that I had chosen in this life that I needed to deal with in order to move on. And it was not, there was no condemnation, there was no judgment, and I realized that the only judgment and condemnation was me judging myself and hating myself because of my circumstances, because of the way my father treated me, because I was a very sensitive kid, and I was not capable. I wasn't like my brother or maybe some of my other sisters who weren't as affected by this as I was. And for whatever reason, my dad, he focused his anger and his rage and his verbal and physical abuse on me. Like, I don't think he ever hit my brother Jim. I don't think he ever hit anybody else. I remember one time he hit my mom, but that's a different story. He only hit her once, and that was when I was in college. And yeah, that's a whole different story. In any case, and all of a sudden I was in the universe, and there was the earth, and it was completely quiet. And all of a sudden God said, "John, look closely." And I looked at the earth, and it was beautiful. But what I saw was it was a perfect tapestry. And I said to God, how can you allow suffering? How can you allow the pain that I have, or the pain, so much pain and so much heartache and so much suffering, and yet it was so, looking at the earth was so perfect and beautiful, and it was perfect. The earth was perfect, and it was sort of like it was breathing. And he said, look closely, and I saw it, and it was a tapestry. The earth was a perfect tapestry of the most beautiful silk I had ever seen. Then all of a sudden I saw just this little tiny thread being pulled. And I felt my heart like being filled with love. And he said, that's you. Without you, this tapestry can't exist. And that you are me, and I am you. And nothing will ever separate you from me. And even though physically you may suffer, and even though psychologically you may suffer, and even though difficult things happen in a carnate life, even though really, really difficult, terrible, horrible things can happen in a carnate life, that you're being transformed. My life lasts just a second. And I realized right then and there that, I had said, I had said in my prayer, God, if you're real, let me know. It was right then and there that I knew that I was the shadow. I was this little thing scuttling across the world. I was like a leaf, a blade of grass. And that God was the great reality, that to question his existence at that moment seemed so silly and so preposterous. It was just incredible. And all of a sudden, boom, we were back. We were on earth. And then God laughed and he said, "Who's real now? So tell me, he called me by my name. He said, "Tell me who's real now." And he laughed. And I laughed because the whole thing was so preposterous, because I recognized that I was this little tiny breath of air, and he was universes. He was everything. He was that love, and who he was and who Jesus was so beautiful, so amazing, and so beyond comprehension. And that he loved me. He didn't have any judgment about me. He didn't judge me. He didn't hold anything against me. He knew me. Every cell of my body, he knew me. He created me. He created me, and I was birthed into this world exactly the way he wanted it to happen. And that I wasn't a mistake. I wasn't broken. I was just me on a journey. And I just wept and I cried and I sobbed and I laughed, because the thought of me asking the creator of the universe who was real and who wasn't. And it just was all so crazy. But the one thing that I was just filled with love, filled with this experience that I was with my Father, and that I was completely safe, completely loved, completely known. And nobody knew me on earth. My parents didn't know me. My mother and father were way too busy with their own dysfunction and their own struggles. And my other siblings were also going through their own traumas and their own problems. And we didn't have the ability to know what to do or anything like that. But all of a sudden I knew I was completely loved. And there was no judgment. That the things that had transpired with me, and the things that would have transpired in the future when I would make mistakes, and I made a shitload of mistakes. Even after this experience, I wasn't made perfect. I was just had this experience. And then all of a sudden I said, and I thought of all of the people who abused me, my father, all the guys that had beaten me up on the playground, and all of the people who had made fun of me, and all of the things. And I said, what's going to happen to them for treating me the way I've been treated? And I saw the nun that had been so cruel with me, and she was just one of several nuns that had been really, really cruel to me. And he said, look. And then all of a sudden, I don't know, but I was like in this room, and they were all in their own beds sleeping. And there was a light around their body. And I felt his love for them flow through me into them. And I felt understanding, forgiveness for every one of them. I felt his love for them, and I understood that he loves all of us. Every one of us, all of us, millions and billions of beings, he loves us the same way. This unconditional understanding that we're just a breath of wind. We're just a leaf. We're just a blade of grass, and yet we are incredibly loved. And that we are an essential part of this plan, this essential part of life. And that our experiences, that through our experiences, God himself was experiencing himself in a way, and so his compassion was complete and perfect. He was growing in compassion and love as we were supposed to grow in compassion and love. And I felt his love for them, and I loved all of them. I just felt this amazing amount of forgiveness for these people who had been so brutal and so terrible. And I understood. I sobbed and I cried. I was crying and sobbing through this whole thing, and just wave after wave of love. And then after that, he said, John, or whatever my real name, which I don't remember, he said, you need to remember two things. Number one is no harm will ever come to you. Like, even though I'm a physical being and I'm a psychological being, and I will experience pain and heartache, and I'll get sick and infirm, and if something's going to happen, maybe I'll walk down the street and I'll get hit by a truck or whatever it is. No harm is going to come to my soul. No harm will ever come to me. And number two is that his love for me is completely unconditional. He doesn't judge me. He knows me, he loves me, he created me. And that's true of every human being. And that nothing that I would do would ever change that. And nothing anybody could do would ever change that. And all of a sudden the light started to dim in the room. And it was growing quiet, and there was this fizzling, like it was like just giving away, and my suicidal thoughts and everything had just been blown like a wind right out of me. I didn't have any desire to kill myself after that. I mean, how could I? I was loved. I was honored. I was important. I was critical to the mission, to the plan. And I didn't have any suicidal thought then at all. It was all gone. But as his spirit began, as this experience began to end, I was sobbing and crying, and I said, tell me what I'm supposed to do now. Show me what you want from me. Give me a plan. And all I heard him say was, John, no harm can come to you. Nothing you can do will ever, you'll never lose my love. And just do the best you can. And then the experience and I was in this dark room again. I was in my cell again by myself. And I felt like I had I thought, I've fucking gone insane. I'm insane. I'm crazy. What just happened was crazy. I'm crazy. And yet I was like ecstatic. I was like sobbing and crying and ecstatic and like, oh my God, I've cracked. Completely insane. And I don't know what time it was. It was like sometime after midnight when all this ended. And hold on, I got to stop this.